morning and welcome back to SHRALP Stories, Tech Tips with Uncle Kolty. We're going to be talking about two very different surfboards, why they're different, what makes them feel different when you're surfing. First one being epoxy. Best way to tell it's epoxy, listen to that twang. It makes like a more high-pitched twang to it. First board being epoxy, second board being poly. You hear how much more dense that sounds? Whereas the other one's like ting ting ting. This is like pum, pum, pum. They're both very similar surfboards. Squash tail thrusters, high performance, single concave. This one goes flat out the tail. That one has single concave throughout the whole thing. That one has a little bit more rocker, things like that. But you can't make an epoxy board and a poly board exactly the same because they surf different. Epoxy boards are going to be much more on top of the water, whereas these ones are going to sit a little bit deeper into the water and have a more sturdy feel, whereas those are going to be more chippy and like loose and fast moving. So we're going to go surf, and when we get out of the water, I'm going to tell you a lot more differences between these two surfboards, what they do different, and we're going to go over some footage. So stay tuned. Don't miss anything.
Got a two-tongue weight from my hairline to my backbone, and it's dragging me around, but I don't listen. All your critics are red, mind your own business. That's right. And run red lights. Now watch me fly. Devil to my right, we're going down. Hit the road, Jack, won't come back, no, you can find me. With the devil in my hand, now here's to the cheaters. Hey, 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 all your critics on line, this one's on me.
Pretty crowded this morning, honestly, as you could probably tell on the camera. It makes sure a tough time for us to get waves, but got a few and had some fun. Got a nose job this morning, you know, broke the poly board. You know, both boards worked really well. First board was the epoxy this morning. The thing handled great. I don't really like epoxy boards because typically they're very on top of the water, kind of skatey, kind of like odd feeling boards, especially when it's offshore wind. They tend to like lift up in the front because they're so dang light. But it handled well, and it had a good drive on it actually, which was quite surprising. These boards are usually pretty flexy, like if you have a look, like they bend a lot, you know? But the board worked great, and then I switched over to the poly board, and I had a lot of fun on it. Going from a super light epoxy board into a heavier, denser poly board, it felt like it had good drive and good hold, and just felt more like settled into the water and like you're stuck to it rather than like floating on top of the water, kind of like skatey, slidey a little bit on the epoxy. So Definitely like the polyboard a little better, but let's go back to the house. We'll go over intricate differences between the two, and I'll play you guys a couple clips. So I'll see you over there. All right, so the surf was fun, a little crowded this morning. It's nice to kind of ride an epoxy board. I never really ride them, but they're really, really interesting surfboards. Two main differences between a poly and epoxy. Epoxy beads are going to be hollow in them, right? So they're blown into a cement or metal blank, or metal mold, and then they expand, and they're hollow on the inside on an epoxy surfboard. Now on a poly surfboard, they're going to be more dense and solid rather than epoxy's hollow. Poly's dense. So that's why you hear that weird twang to it. Now, different kinds of resin as well. Epoxy resin doesn't heat up. It's used a 50-50 mix ratio between resin and hardener, whereas poly resin is a catalyst that you add to the resin. So rather than epoxy you use a hardener, poly you use a catalyst. You can go back into our old episodes and learn how to laminate a surfboard. It's the same thing for both surfboards, epoxy or poly. Different techniques can be used. A lot of people use different techniques, but so those are some of the main differences between a poly and an epoxy surfboard in the building process. Now in the surfing world, when you're in the water actually, an epoxy board is a lot more floaty, you'll notice, and that could be because the beads are hollow on the inside, just like you would see in a styrofoam cooler. When you break it open, they're like hollow, floaty, soft beads. Whereas if you broke open a poly surfboard, it's more dense and like harder to press and like compress and things like that. You know, it's going to be sitting a little bit lower in the water, have a little bit sturdier feel and maybe a little bit slower feel, some people like to say. You know, I personally prefer poly surfboards over epoxy because they sit deeper in the water, they're more fluid, they're more true to their line, and they don't act up when it gets windy or choppy. A lot of the times people have problems with epoxy surfboards when it's choppy. They'll be like bouncy and chattery and kind of hard to keep in the water. They're, you know, just a little bit more tough to surf, I think, when it's windy or choppy or bumpy or something. Whereas a polyboard is going to sit deeper in the water, be more true to its line, and it's going to plow right through any chops or any bumps or anything like that. Today, I started off on that epoxy board because I've ridden it a little bit lately and I've kind of been used to that. So I wanted to start with that and then get back on my old polyboard that I've been riding forever and I love. So first wave here, dropped in, got some speed down the line and did a little crack on the end section. And you'll notice it had great speed out the get-go. Like out the gate, it instantly had good projection down the line. I did a little fade off the takeoff, first pump, got a bunch of speed down the line. Did two little pumps and then went straight into the lip. But you'll notice once I hit the lip, I'm used to it. My board's sticking to the water very well and being like bam and like throwing me down into the flats. Whereas this one wanted to just like fly into the sky because it's so dang light, you know? Once I hit that lip, the board just popped and went out and it felt like I was gonna fly away and lose my board. Now I held on to it barely, but normally a poly board, it would smack it and like stay stuck and glued to the water, whereas this one went pop and tried to like fling away from me a little bit. But that was a good example of like some differences there. Now here's a little left-hander we got. And in the tube, remember I was talking about windy conditions, bumpy conditions, things like that. Epoxy boards have a tough time. Same thing is going to be in the barrel on the foam ball. So once the foam ball hits your board, typically a poly board, yeah, you'll bounce and do things, but it'll be more true to its line and go straight down the line and hold through all those sections. Whereas the epoxy board, you're going to be bouncing and flinging around. It's going to be a little bit more difficult to hold its line. But this one here worked out well. I made it all the way down to the end section. You know, it's something that I'm still learning how to do, ride epoxy boards, but this little barrel, it made for a good one. They do have good speed right out of the gate compared to a poly board. Epoxy boards, they have great speed right out of the get-go because they're so light and so on top of the water and so buoyant that they just get good projection out of your bottom turn. And they paddle a lot easier too, you'll notice as well, because they're so light and buoyant. So that's why a lot of people like them. But they definitely are a little bit more difficult to ride the barrel, I think. You know, I know for a fact, actually, Italo Ferreira, he rides a 6'5" epoxy stringered epoxy board with a stringer for pipe, and that's his pipe board. He loves it. I don't know what it is, but it's offshore and it's big heavy barrels, but he just loves his epoxy boards. He's a weirdo. but we all know he's a great surfer too. Here's another little right-hander I got on my epoxy board. Now, dropped in pretty late. I'm holding the wall with my back arm, trying to slow down. Got in the pocket for a second, and then now I'm gonna try to gain some speed. And you'll notice, like, if you'll look, like right when I come out of the tube, my board's kind of like doing this weird chattery thing, and you'll notice the nose going like boing, 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 boing. And that's the epoxy right there acting up, and that's what I don't really like about it. So it's really hard to control, and I tend to have to move a lot slower than I even do on my poly boards, which I do move pretty slow. I had to like let it settle down a little bit before I actually did my bottom turn, and then it threw me up into the lip, and it gave me good projection off the lip to do this little punt. And I don't know what it is with these epoxy boards, but they're so fast and so like alive, it's weird. But you know, it's not necessarily my favorite. And then you switch over to my poly board, my standard 510 alley wrap model from Timmy Patterson, and you'll notice instantly it's a lot more sturdy and true to its line. When I come around for this turn, I don't have to like wiggle around and fiddle with it so much. It's already going where it wants to go and doing what it wants to do. It's a little bit easier to surf in my opinion. You'll notice on this next wave as well, I dropped in and it was a wedge. So there was like a little side wave coming towards me, and I dropped in and had no time to get any speed. So I went straight to the bottom and straight to the top, and that's all I could do. And it gave me good projection into the lip, and when I hit the lip right here on the epoxy board, it would have wanted to fling away from me like I was talking about earlier. But you'll notice here, my poly board stays stuck to the wave and stays glued and true to its line, and it's much easier to put more power into my back foot and really push that turn and throw a lot more water. And then I had to dodge this kid's board. He ditched it right in front of me. Almost, I should have just ran the dang thing over, huh? Why don't you tell me what I should have done in the comments? But so then there's this little left-hand barrel, just like I had earlier, and this one is a little bit smaller, but I was able to get a little deeper and kind of ride the foam ball a little bit for a second here, and you know, I was able to handle the lip hitting me a little bit more because, you know, the poly board's a little more true to its line. And then I went straight up into the lip, did a little top turn, rode the foam out, and it's just a lot more sturdy feel. It's like taking a go-kart versus like a Toyota Tundra. You know, what do you want? Do you want like a little rally car? Or do you want a Toyota Tundra or a Silverado, whatever you drive truck-wise? But you want something heavy that's going to plow through stuff on the freeway, or do you want like a little nimble go-kart thing that's going to just slide around and make all the corners, you know? So just, it's personal preference. I like a sturdy, heavy board. I like my boards to be, I like when my boards are dinged up and waterlogged because they're even more dense and more heavy, you know, especially my longboards. My longboards, I like them to be with one fin and very heavy. That's just me. Call me weird, but it is what it is. So that's some of the main differences between a poly and an epoxy surfboard. You know, I like an epoxy board on a glassy day with no wind, nobody out always, and preferably a mushy wave. That's just me. Because they're so floaty and they're so lively. You can go way out into the flats, do big turns all the way back around, and they're just fun to ride. And then my poly board is good for any day, any time, is the way I see it. You know, when it's windy offshore or choppy onshore, whatever, your epoxy board is going to be chattery and kind of like fluttery down the line, not so like sturdy. I've had a lot of knee injuries, so I really like when my board is like true to its line and I know where it's going and I know it's going to be under my feet when I finish my turn. So hope you guys enjoyed that. Hope you guys learned something about the differences between a poly and epoxy. There's a lot of information there with the different chemicals and all that. But anyway, it was a fun surf this morning. Thanks for tuning back in. And how about you guys tune in next time for another Tech Tips with Uncle Kolty. I'll see you guys later.
The tides are running, it's time to go. No reason to take it slow. Gotta get up, hit the road, and say what's up to Poncho.